National Guard presence in D.C. is set to increase in the coming days. Several Republican governors announced on Saturday that they will be deploying some of their state's National Guard troops to help Donald Trump's efforts in the nation's capital. Donald Trump's federal takeover of Washington, D.C.'s police force isn't just a test on the limits of his authority. It's a show of force in the name of public safety. Trump is using crime in D.C. and residents' fear as an excuse to deploy the National Guard, the FBI, DHS, and ICE to the city. Explain that to me, why ICE is involved in this. There was a time when Trump had the opportunity to quell a massive crime spree in D.C., when an angry, violent mob descended on the nation's capital to disrupt America's democratic process. Remember that? The so-called law and order president could have sent the National Guard in immediately, but he held off. Video released during the January 6th hearing shows Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer pleading with the Pentagon to send in the National Guard. Troops arrived only hours later. Dozens of police officers were injured. 5 died in the days and weeks that followed. Veteran Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone nearly died defending the Capitol from rioters. He suffered burns, a heart attack, and brain injuries. According to Fanone, the federal takeover, quote, makes no sense. Federal law states that the president can only take control of D.C.'s law enforcement on an emergency basis, and there's no emergency happening on the streets of D.C. right now. Sure, there's crime, homelessness, and other problems that you see in any city, but the crime rate has actually been steadily falling. Trump's not trying to fight crime. He's trying to assert dominance, end quote. Michael Fanone joins me now. He's a retired D.C. Metropolitan Police officer. He served 20 years in Washington, D.C.'s police department. He helped defend the Capitol on January the 6th. He's also the author of Hold the Line, The Insurrection and One Cop's Battle for America's Soul. Michael, great to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
I think you would agree. All Americans would agree. We certainly don't want to be put on the wrong side of saying crime is bad and we'd like to fight all crime in cities. But there has been a trend in major cities, and particularly in Washington, D.C., toward lower crime. If it wasn't an emergency in Donald Trump's first term, it's certainly less of an emergency now.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying there is crime in Washington, D.C., and there is a crime problem in Washington, D.C. And I see the president's response to that. I look at it in 2 parts. But first, I want to remind Americans, I know it's been talked about a lot this week, but it bears repeating, especially from myself. On January 6, 2021, when 15,000 Trump supporters marched on the Capitol, stormed the Capitol, and assaulted law enforcement officers, Donald Trump didn't see fit to call in the National Guard then and sat idly by for hours while officers like myself were being beaten and almost killed. That being said, he now feels as though he should deploy the National Guard. And the issue that I take with that is there is no crime, there's no spike in crime that we're experiencing in Washington, D.C. And even then, what is it exactly that the National Guard will do to quell that other than the optics of this occupying force, which I think most Americans resent. I certainly would resent that if I saw this show of force in my community. And I know a lot of D.C. residents that I've talked to over the past weeks certainly resent seeing this in their community. And it does nothing. Having armored vehicles parked on, the National Mall does nothing except create this illusion of, or the idea of fear and an occupying force. Then if you talk about the way that Donald Trump is now deploying these federal agencies, the 3-letter agencies, ATF, yep, DEA, FBI, there is a place. I was a federal task force officer. I worked alongside of federal partners as a Metropolitan Police officer. There is a place for that. That place is not having roving bands of officers in tactical gear aimlessly walking around, Georgetown or downtown Washington, D.C., again, creating, the optics of an occupying force and fear. The community policing model was born out of this.
Yes.
And it's an imperfect model.
But you're trained for it. You're trying to get, everybody's trying to get better at it, right? It's imperfect, but it's the idea that that's a different role than the National Guard has.
Well, it comes from, the idea that these agencies are charged with keeping the community safe. and citizens should have a say-so in how they are policed. And so citizens don't want to feel as though they're occupied. They want to be safe, but they don't want to feel like they're being, occupied by an army. And that's what you have now taking over in D.C. And it's not an efficient use of those resources. They could be better used. Federal agencies do a few things really, really well. They know how to conduct long-term investigations, and they bring with them federal resources, technology, money that local police departments don't have access to.
Yep.
And so that's how these, agents should be used to bolster these, federal task force, not out there walking around harassing citizens and pissing people off who have to, are trying to go about their daily business and see this in their streets.
The other question I've got is ICE. It feels like this all feels like the National Guard and ICE. It all feels like Donald Trump trying to sort of normalize the idea that his police are in charge, not your police, not the D.C. police that are answerable to the city council of D.C., his police who are answerable to him. There's some bad precedents to that in history.
I agree. And I think it's important, you hit the nail right on the head. ICE is Donald Trump's police department. When the American people think federal agencies, they should separate the FBI, the DEA,
yes.
the ATF from ICE.
Yes.
The behavior that I have seen displayed by ICE agents over the past, month or so is unjustifiable. I'm sure there are some ICE agents that are out there that, are just trying to do their job. But again, I look at it as though, complicity in this, silence is complicity. Quit your job. And that would be my message to everyone in the law enforcement community that's being co-opted by the Trump administration to do things that are immoral, unethical, and in many cases unconstitutional. Yep. Quit your job. There's a lot of other jobs out there. I quit my job at the police department, and I got to tell you, when it comes to law enforcement, the grass is always greener somewhere else.
Yep. Michael, thank you for your service to the country, your continued service to the country. Michael Fanone is a retired D.C. Metro police officer. He's the co-author of an important book, Hold the Line, The Insurrection, and One Cop's Battle for America's Soul.